I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting is being conducted in person from the Central Services Building. In order to allow as much public access and participation as possible, this meeting is also being broadcast via live stream on the MPS website and on the MPS YouTube stream, the links to which may be found on the MPS website on the broadcast page. Before we begin tonight's meeting, we have a short announcement regarding interpretation services for the Spanish-speaking members of our audience.
Buenas tardes y bienvenidos a la Junta Escolar de las Escuelas Públicas de Milwaukee. Si desea escuchar esta reunión en español, por favor llame al 312-626-6799. Nuevamente, 312-626-6799. E introduzca el número de reunión 608-130-5362. Nuevamente, el número de reunión es 608-130-5362. Gracias.
For each of our items of business, we will hold a discussion and public hearing. Those who wish to speak on tonight's items were required to register in advance of the start of the meeting. When you are called upon to speak, please state your name and spell your last name for the record. I ask that those who are waiting to speak virtually to remain on the platform until you are called upon to speak. After a speaker's time is up, they may continue to follow the meeting at any of the broadcast options mentioned previously. For the sake of fairness and to give everyone a chance to speak, the chair reserves the right to limit the length of time allowed to any one speaker. Written testimony will be accepted for transmittal to the board. Send this testimony to the Office of Board Governance, P.O. Box 2181, Milwaukee, Wisconsin 53201, or fax to 414-475-8071, or email it to governance@milwaukee.k12.wi.us. Just as a reminder, Robert Rules of Order dictates that all comments should be directed to the chair of the committee. Also, any questions or requests, including those from the public, committee members, or the administration, are to be directed towards the chair, who will determine the most efficient way to address them. Please be respectful of the democratic process adhered to by the board. For the safety of all and to ensure the good order of the meeting, harassment or intimidation tactics of any kind will not be tolerated. Anyone persisting in disrupting this process will be asked to leave or will be escorted from the meeting and not allowed to return. Anyone ejected from the meeting may continue to listen to the meeting or access the agenda items online. Also, no one other than members of the board, designated staff, and those who have been invited to present or participate in items of business will be allowed on stage before, during, and after meetings of the board and its committees. Also, for our listening audience, if you wish to access this evening's agenda items and attachments online, you may do so by visiting the Meetings, Agendas, and Minutes page on the MPS website and choosing Online Agendas. Now let's begin. Madam Secretary. Item 1.
Sorry about that. Item number 1 is an update with possible action on the district's multi-tiered system of supports and interventions. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Would administration please present this item?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, this evening we bring to you an update on the district multi-tiered system of support and interventions. This report will focus on the district's proactive strategies used to support students and schools teams that work with students using a variety of these different approaches. To present this item, I have with me Mr. John Jagman, who's the district discipline manager, He's joined with us by Myra Weingart, Supervisor of Restorative Practices, and Principal Palmer of Andrew Douglas Middle School. Following the presentation, we'll be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have. Mr. Jagman.
Thank you, Dr. Posley. Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman, District Discipline Manager. First, we always center ourselves in the 5 priorities for success and looking at how our work in this area, specifically looking to improve district and school culture as a way to increase academic achievement and accountability. Looking at proactive supports and interventions, on a monthly basis, we are highlighting an aspect of the Culture, Climate, and Alternatives to Suspensions Toolkit. In February, we focused on interrupting bias and reimagining classroom management through a lens of equity. Strategies within that included building background knowledge, using stereotype replacement, using perspective taking, mindfulness, and empathetic listening to interrupt bias in our daily interactions with students. We also looked at reimagining classroom management for equity, which includes things such as positive framing, building a class community, critical reflective practices for the adults in the setting, and having persistent practices of high accountability and high supports for all students. Looking at alternatives to suspension through February, we see the number of conferences held, counseling held, detention, mediation, referral to the building intervention team, support staff referrals, the use of repairing harm circles, and the use of restorative conversations. Again, these are by school administrators as the result of behavior referrals being submitted. We also got in front of all school leaders during Principal Leadership Institute to talk about those previously mentioned best practices around interrupting bias and reframing classroom management through equity. Looking at Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions within the multi-tiered system of support, we see we've had about almost 2,000 check-in, check-out year-to-date, a little over 480 individualized check-in, check-out, a little over 1,300 social academic instructional groups, often called SAG groups, over 122 behavior assessment intervention plans, or BAPEs, 200 FBA BIPs, a little over 135 educational wraparound and renew as a Tier 3 intervention. So we have had over 4,252 Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions provided to students year-to-date throughout Milwaukee Public Schools. Looking at that student, staff, and community collaboration, we have our District Equity Leadership Team, or DELT, that meets monthly. We meet with a representative from Courageous Conversations About Race. This past month, we looked at the concept of below the iceberg and looked at what are some of those issues sustaining and holding up the iceberg, specifically looking at discipline disproportionality. As a team, we started to dig into what are some of those things below the water that are upholding that iceberg. We also have held a number of Courageous Conversations About Race, their one-day exploration. So you can see that very first 6 months implementation, our first session was held on March 1st, 2021. So throughout the rest of that school year, we held 19 sessions for school staff. And then throughout the last school year, the 21-22 school year, we held 23 sessions. And then this school year of August 2022 through February 28th, 2023, we have held 30. And again, this school year is the year that we are having capacity internally, where we have internal facilitators facilitating those sessions, where previously we contracted with Courageous Conversations for that work. So all time since March 1st, 2021, we have held 72 sessions of their one-day Courageous Conversations About Race exploration. Our next steps, we are looking at our March toolkit focus. We are focusing on some proactive practices and redirection strategies, specifically looking at chronic disruption. So we were highlighting some of the lesser used proactive practices and redirection strategies from the toolkit that can specifically look at chronic disruption. We are holding student and staff member focus groups. We are looking at getting feedback on the culture and climate toolkit, because we're going to start to address that and update it for next school year. We're having focus groups with staff and students on what's in there, what other supports would they like to see, what are the things we would like them to highlight. We have our quarterly community conversation next week on March 15th. The topic is going to be multi-tiered system of support. We're going to engage the community in understanding the multi-tiered system of support and getting feedback from the community on areas that we could implement and increase our interventions and supports. We are also establishing a data gallery presentation for Central Services staff members, highlighting some of this data that's maybe below the iceberg around discipline disproportionality, so that we can engage more staff members across the district to understand that data in ways that they can implement and they can help support that. We are also looking at our April Student Leadership Summit at the end of the month in April. We are going to do a hybrid model where students stay in their school building, but we're going to have Central Services staff members go to each of the 30 middle and high schools and engage them in a conversation while engaged in a internalized Zoom session where they're still getting those topics, but they're having conversations at the school level and then sharing across schools utilizing Zoom. So we're going to kind of do it in a hybrid model. All right, I now will turn it over to Mariah Weingrod.
Thank you, Mr. Jagman. Chair Garcia, members of the committee, my name is Mariah Weingrad. I'm the Restorative Practices Supervisor for Milwaukee Public Schools. I am here to present to you the progress of the Restorative Practices Department within MPS. I want to preface that what I'm sharing with you today has been a labor of love. My team intentionally took time to develop what our department values, vision, and mission are using a collaborative and restorative process that centered the voices of my coaches and the ones who are invested in and doing this work in schools, the MPS Restorative Practices team. And we are working to model with one another what we work to accomplish within our schools. Our values are that we center relationships. That is at the heart of healing, dignity, justice, joy, and trust that we are looking to build. Our vision for restorative practices is a liberated educational community where everyone is celebrated for who they are, feels a strong sense of connection and belonging, and responds to conflict and discomfort as an opportunity to repair, strengthen, and heal the community. We are working to do this by being deliberate about dismantling educational systems and structures that historically and continue to oppress our Black and brown communities. We transform educational culture using a continuum of restorative practices that we will share tonight. And these practices build inclusive communities founded on shared values that celebrate all cultures and identities. To accomplish this vision and mission, we're working to find new ways of operating and putting emphasis on why and how we educate our young people. This slide represents the continuum of restorative practices that showcases what elements exist within a restorative school community. Our team has been developing training and coaching around these core elements for schools. As my coach, Lakeisha Russell, would describe, at the center of this continuum is the heart of the work. Racial justice and equity beats throughout each practice. Without courageous conversations about race and equity PD, we would not have been able to get to the place we are currently. If you move from the center to the top of the continuum, that is where the practice begins. It starts with cultivating a restorative mindset. Each practice is student-centered and ongoing. The proactive practices work to develop strong, healthy communities and flow into the responsive practices that deal with how we handle conflict and trauma as it arises, because conflict and trauma are part of our reality and should be expected. However, without a strong, healthy community that people feel a sense of belonging and connection to, we cannot repair or heal from harm if there is nothing to restore back to. So how we deal with issues can lead to learning and growth, or they can further harm and traumatize. To ensure that we learn and grow from difficulties, we must invest in the proactive practices needed to build communities founded on shared values and expectations of how we work together. This is how the Restorative Practices Department is currently operating. We are a small but mighty team of 1 supervisor, 7 coaches, and a newly hired planning assistant. In order to build capacity within our district, we are working to collaborate with those who share our vision and mission, and we are working to align our efforts with other teams and departments, teams like PBIS, Gender Identity and Inclusion, Black and Latino Malachievement, Student Services, Violence Prevention, and the 53206 Initiative. We can't do this work without these people and the collaborative efforts that we unite together around. The restorative practices coaches are leading work groups that collaborate with members from these different groups, teams, and departments around 4 different areas. A school flexible implementation plan that guides our work within our buildings. A PD series that attaches to the continuum of restorative practices that was shown previously. A high school elective course that is also part of our implementation process for high schools. And an exploration cohort to try and support schools who do not yet have a coach but would like consultation and direction on a whole school approach to restorative practices. This is all in an effort to support schools and have a plan that integrates initiative, all meant to support students' academic, physical, and social emotional needs. And although this phrase has been used by many brilliant politicians, activists, and community members and elders, I will quote Alice Walker in her use of, "We are the ones we've been waiting for. We can't do this work without one another, and no one can do this but us." Working together and collaborating, listening to one another, and creating a plan is most important. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Garcia, members of the committee. I am Zerda Palmer, and I am the principal of Andrew Douglas Middle School. I would like to discuss 2 areas where the staff at Douglas have worked diligently to improve outcomes. The next slide represents some of the strategies that we as a staff have put in place this school year. However, I will focus on 2 areas where we have had the largest decreases in our suspensions. While decreasing all incidents of all kinds right now is the goal of every school administrator. However, we wanted to be very purposeful around specific actions. We wanted to be specific around actions that would impact specific behaviors. For example, we wanted to address physical altercations between students. Our trauma support specialist created a mediation request Google form. This form is accessed by all staff members, teachers, paras, safety, secretaries, and administrators. If there is any indication that an incident may occur, staff are able to input information to request mediation services. This Google form has been wonderful for us at Douglas in that if there is any indication that an incident will occur, information is written down. Again, this Google form has worked really well for us because all disagreements between students are not overt with loud arguing and posturing. Sometimes students may plan fights on social media, or sometimes we get a tip from our parents, or sometimes even other students. At Douglas, if we hear something, we say something. The trauma support specialist, a member of the administrative team, school social worker, school psychologist, parent coordinators all have the ability to facilitate mediations based on urgency, the sensitive nature of the topic, and/or availability of staff. Student IDs are used for data collection in this process, and we have had a decrease of 49 suspensions for fighting compared to last school year. The second strategy I would like to highlight from this slide is one that we've used at Douglas to address chronic disruptions. These disruptions most often occur in classrooms. We have implemented the use of calming corners. We wanted to start at the Tier 1 level, which means that all classrooms have a semi-secluded, walled-off space outfitted with a rug, comfortable floor chair or beanbag, coloring books, fidgets, and other manipulatives. Because we want students to remain in the classroom as much as possible, the implementation of calming corners gives students the opportunity to separate and regulate themselves while remaining in the room for instruction. This strategy has proven to be a great intervention, as we have also seen a decrease here of 74 suspensions for chronic disruptions compared to last school year. This next slide is extremely important as it speaks to the commitment, the teamwork, and support it takes to do this work. First and foremost, the dedicated staff at Andrew Douglas Middle School has done an amazing job with building relationships with students, utilizing the PBIS framework with fidelity, and very recently working as a team to implement a new escorting policy to further mitigate incidents and increase our instructional minutes. Additionally, as referenced by the slide, we also have wonderful community partners that are helping to do this work as well. Ms. Glenna and Girls of Color, Jakari Carr, and also Mentor Milwaukee and Lutheran Social Services, to name a few, are some of these partners that are helping us do this work. Additionally, after-school programs such as Twilight and Chef's Club have created additional relationship-building opportunities among both students and staff. The changes that we are making at Douglas may not seem huge to the naked eye. However, baby steps and small wins are how we will move Douglas forward. Thank you.
Thank you, administration, for that presentation. And thank you to Ms. Weinbright. I think the team is doing an amazing job at really tying the pieces of what at one point felt a little bit disconnected. So I'm glad to see the progress that has been made on that regard. But yeah, so thank you, Principal Palmer, for sharing the updates on the school. But interested in seeing what committee members wish to make any remarks on, what we just heard. Yes, Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, but I'll just start. Well, I'll go in order then. Principal Palmer, I wanted to thank you for your presentation. I love hearing about these solutions that maybe we wouldn't have thought of, like the mediation requests via Google Forms. It wouldn't have been something that I thought of, but hearing it makes perfect sense. So I just wanted to thank you, and recognizing, you may think that a reduction of 49 suspensions for fights doesn't sound like, you may think that you should have had more or something, but I am very pleased to hear this about all of that progress. So thank you very much for that. I think it gives us lots to consider. I did have a question for administration for the restorative practices. So it sounds like you're working with PBIS, the Gender Identity and Inclusion and Violence Prevention and BLMA. So does administration have any, any ways or ideas on how the board can help foster breaking down silos like this and coordinating the work either within central office, or how do we push it out more to the community?
Administration.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, One of the things that we're doing is trying to, because each one of these groups are small departments, and we are trying to make sure that we have a footprint in all of our schools. So in how we can spread all of this great knowledge out to various schools and locations. The other piece is the idea around professional development opportunities, being able to push that out through professional development opportunities so that other school groups, communities can do that. We have a monthly Principals Institute, where at each one of those monthly Principal Institutes, the regionals and the ILDs are working with principals on, looking at the toolkit, various different things around the toolkit, looking at how we reduce suspension, some of the best practices, cutting edge things that are out there, and sharing best practices from other schools or what's happening with other school locations. And then looking at how we can scale this work and being totally transparent around that. John, anything you want to add?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman. I want to add, we also have that district discipline disproportionality leadership team. It's a mouthful, I know, but that team has the supervisor or a member of all those teams that Mariah listed off that we meet monthly. It is centered around this idea of discipline disproportionality, where sometimes we're in different spaces together talking about different that, but like that team specifically comes to the table to present what they are doing and how the data kind of reflects in their spaces. And I think it was in the beginning of February, it might have been end of January, we all met, we had a retreat, we called it, where all the coaches of all these teams came and met together to build that community as different departments and specifically talk about looking into next year, how can we build a plan together where we all have our knowledge, our skills present, so the schools are receiving one message, and like, this is the message, this is how Mariah's team can support, this is how this and this. So we are specifically meeting, we always have monthly, but now, the rest of this year, we're specifically meeting on aligning our plans and calendars and PD for next year, so it comes out as like one message.
Any follow-up?
Thank you so much, because I really think they're almost like legs of a stool or legs of a chair, right? Like, I think they all work in collaboration to support the work. It's not just like one element working independently. My last question, thank you so much, Chair Garcia. So for the Courageous Conversations About Race, you listed that 72 sessions have been held. I think the goal, we passed it in 2019. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there was a 5-year plan. Do the 72 sessions like put us on pace, or do you need something from the board to accelerate the work? It sounds like we now have our own facilitators, so maybe that, I've seen the numbers were growing, so I don't know if that means like, yep, now we're on pace.
Mr. Jagman?
Yep. Chair Garcia, members of the committee. So yes, the 3-year plan we were specifically looking at was March 1st, 2021, and the 5-year plan did start in 2019. We have a plan to march out the specific groups, like we are doing the sessions for facilities and maintenance, which might sound like nothing, but there's 800 staff members in facilities and maintenance. We're doing them in the next 45 days. That's going to add 800 to these numbers. So we are at the point of the numbers are moving up slowly, but we have more capacity as facilitators. We have more capacity in how we're reaching out, and we have, I think, already about 10 sessions planned for May and June once school years end to really get to those teachers and paraprofessionals. And going into next year, we did it this year. It is a part of New Educators Institute, and it's a part of the 2-day onboarding for paraprofessionals. So going forward, we are meeting teachers and paraprofessionals specifically as they are hired to get in. So we have, I'll be honest, built the numbers up slower, but we have hit that kind of capacity number where we are going to start to see them go up quite a bit.
Any other committee members? Director Leonard?
So, Ms. Palmer, just a couple of questions, because I was a middle school teacher forever, and I'm curious, when you first started the classroom calming centers, how did that really go? I'm just curious, because I'm like envisioning what I'd went through, and it created a really good relationship with my students, so that was possible. I'm not sure if every teacher is able to do that or not, but I'm curious.
Principal Palmer?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, Ms. Palmer, principal at Douglas, Very good question. So honestly, this is a process that we had to teach to students in terms of how to treat the materials in the calming corner. There's also a bit of a criteria in terms of why would you go to the calming corner. For example, if a student is very upset, really irate, that's not probably appropriate for the calming corner. So really, my support staff having professional development sessions with staff around what should it look like, how do students access. The very first year, obviously that first semester did not go so well. We were reordering manipulatives and things like that. So we as adults had to take a step back to say, okay, how can we set up kids for success? And so it became a part of like our SEL lessons and how do we use our materials.
Any follow-up?
One more question. Thank you. Appreciate that. What is your new escorting policy? And maybe I wasn't listening, so I apologize.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, Zerda Palmer, principal at Douglas. So currently, our staff are the ones that are transitioning from room to room versus our students moving from room to room. We looked at some data right before Christmas break, and we know things tend to change before big breaks, and so we started to see some things increasing that we did not like, and so we wanted to be a little bit proactive. It was definitely something that I wanted to do, but got input from staff, my admin team, because obviously they're the ones that have to do the work of moving, so making sure that they bought into that. It was also slated to be a 28-day plan for February, so now we need to start talking about how do we get our kids back out into the hallways, transitioning appropriately.
Okay. Thank you.
Director Taylor.
Thank you, Chair Garcia, and thank you for coming, Ms. Palmer. I was going to ask, and then you talked about how it is the staff that moves from room to room. And I just wanted to know, like, when you say administrative staff, like, who exactly is it? Is it the educators or those, like, SSTs? Because one thing that we've heard all year, or for the last 2 years, is the shortage of staff. So just trying to wonder, how are you configuring that to ensure that it's staying on track?
Principal Palmer.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, very great question. So obviously a lot of planning went into that. And so while the teachers are set to transitioning, all of the administrative team, principal, assistant principal, dean, any support staff, safety, we're all hands on deck. We all man a classroom so that teachers are able to get from place to place and students are also supervised.
Follow-up.
No, I just want to say thank you for that and just visualizing that for us, because a lot of times we hear about a lot of great things that can be happening, but then staff kind of becomes the barrier how we can like efficiently and effectively help our schools. So thank you for that. Thank you, Chair Rossi.
All right. Director Simpson.
Guess I'm going. So first of all, I'd just like to thank Mariah Weingrad for being here tonight. It is nice to have a former colleague from NESCARA here on the floor, and really want to thank you for the reporting that you gave on the restorative practices work that you're doing. It's incredibly important, and just reading through the time that you took to develop that values, vision, and mission statement, it's so deep and so meaningful, as well as just that continuum. Like that's a body of work that really has a lot of power and thought behind it. And it was just, I really appreciated that presentation being presented to the board tonight, because I think restorative practices is just an incredibly important piece of that stool that Director O'Halloran was speaking of, where we're all, that's like that's one leg of it, and it's a really important piece. And also the alignment that's happening across those different groups is something that we've felt wasn't really happening, so it's really nice to hear that that's happening. I'd like to thank Principal Palmer for speaking tonight. I was wondering about the transition, and so to hear it's a 28-day plan, I think was really wise. Like, we're going to do this just to kind of calm things down, and that you have a plan for moving forward. And just from when you talked about laying the groundwork for the calming corners, it seems like you really have that that knowledge base that we have to really lay the groundwork behind the work, what we're doing with our kids so that it doesn't backfire. So just thanks for the work that you're doing there. I do have one question though for Mr. Jacoman. So you talked about the conversations you're having where you're kind of like digging below that iceberg. Is there anything that you can share, some examples of that conversation or how that conversation is structured or will be structured moving forward in terms of digging down? Because that's a piece that I think that's something we've been hearing that we have to do. It's been an ask that's been made by the community. So just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Mr. Jackman?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman. So we're following, I'll say, like the lead of Courageous Conversation about race and how they do this with DELT. So this month, they had us just go down the iceberg. And then next month, we're going to come back into that space and we're going to go back up the iceberg and build it through a more racial, equitable lens. So they do it in 3 stages. The first stage is looking at the historical aspect of what's the first thing upholding it. So what's the history of discipline disproportionality in the district, and what does that look like? Second level is what are those systems and structures that are in the district that are upholding it, and so we're just identifying what different people think that is, because my lens on that is different than someone else's. And then the bottom one is what are those mental models or mindsets within the district that are ultimately holding up. So that's what we've done. We've gone down and identified those. We haven't done this yet. We're going to follow their guidance on it, but then go back up. What are those mindsets we would like to see to uphold a different iceberg? What are those systems and structures we would like to see to uphold it? And then what is that historical kind of view, the mission and vision of this work that could uphold a different iceberg that isn't discipline disproportionality? So that's the model that they use. I know there's different variations of it, but that's the one that they use when they go into districts, which is also why we're doing focus groups now so that we have staff and student voice in that. And then we want to do this gallery walk at Central Services, so I'll use academics as an example. So folks from academics can come to that space and see some things, and hey, from my academic lens, this is what I see that's below the iceberg as well.
Director Peterson.
Thank you. Thank you, all 3 presenters. This is really groundbreaking work that we're doing, from breaking silos to building communities in all sorts of ways. And so I appreciate that a great deal. I just had a couple specific questions. One was for Mr. Jageman. You mentioned the concept of reframing classroom bias through equity. Could you explain what that might look like for a classroom teacher?
Mr. Jagman.
Chair Garcia and members of the committee. So we looked at it through 2 lenses, and we've been building this idea of bias for 5 or 6 years, where we get in front of staff, and I would say 4 years ago we started it where we identified we all have bias, and we defined bias. We did a lot of work with Dr. Holly. This is bias. The last couple of years we've gotten past that and said we all have bias. We live in a racialized world. We intake bias. So we talked about what are some strategies to interrupt bias. If it's in that situation, doing a mindful breath. If it's bigger picture, reading books from authors of various races. If it's going to different parts of the community. So that's what we talked about in terms of bias, of how we as an adult in a racialized world in these spaces interrupt bias when it comes out. Then we also looked at this idea of building our classroom management through a lens of equity. And a lot of this comes from, there's a book called These Kids Are Out of Control by Richard Milner. He calls it that on purpose because it's kind of a provocative title, where he looks at those 4 areas. Positive framing. How do we positively frame the educational experience for all students, all families, all the time? Like, you're going to engage in this, you're going to do great, you're going to be successful. Positively framing all aspects of education. And then classroom community, which I know you keep hearing, but he emphasizes that. How are you building that classroom community? Critical reflective practices is the adult looking at their role in classroom management and in the climate of the classroom. You know, it's not, we have a group of students who are very talkative. I have a role in that as an adult. Like, and what structure, what expectations do I have? So the critical reflective practices. And then the last one he calls is persistent practices, which is a one-on-one correlation with restorative practices of that high accountability, high support. I'm going to hold you to here. If you don't meet it, we're going to have a conversation, but I'm going to support you to get to this level. And so he calls it persistent practices. It's very similar. So those are the 4 areas that we're working with staff to rethink your classroom management, because it looks different in kindergarten than it does in 12th grade. It looks different at Douglas than it does at another school. but looking at your practices through, are you persistent with them? Are you positively framing them? Are you looking at your role in it? And are you building that classroom community?
Follow up?
Yeah, thank you very much. My other question has to do with its restorative practices, slide 11 rather, and it's described as the cohort schools and then the coaching and support. And I was wondering if you might be, Ms. Weingrad, if you could describe what happens at cohort schools in terms of the support, and then also who gets and what is the nature of a 3-day in-school coaching? Is that for cohort schools or other schools? So,
Ms. Wainwright?
Chair Garcia and members of the committee, the cohort schools that were listed are the schools that are currently receiving 3 days a week of coaching support around restorative practices within their building. And what that looks like is staff from those schools have an opportunity to go to training around the continuum of practices, especially the proactive practices that exist within that continuum. And then the coaches facilitate implementation teams within the buildings that use a plan to move the work forward and support teachers within their classrooms of taking those skills that they're learning in training and transitioning them into actual use within what they do every day.
Any follow-up?
thank you very much for that explanation.
Is there any members of the public that would like to make comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have speakers online and in person. Would you like to go to the virtual platform first?
Yes, let's do virtual.
Okay, great. State your name, spell your last name, and begin your
Hello?
testimony. Hello, we can hear you, yes. Hello, can you hear us? Madam Chair, we will get technology.
Is it coming back in?
Hello,
Hello?
can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Please spell your last name and begin your testimony.
Angela Lucas Foley, Lucas space Foley. Good evening, Chair Garcia, Board of Directors. I come to you this evening as a parent, as a white educator, and a proud member of aspiring anti-racist white educators of Milwaukee. I am here today this evening as I have been before, to make comment on the item before us. Really focusing in on community involvement. As school board directors, how can you involve the community in developing solutions to exclusionary discipline? How can you better examine practices and how they are working? As you know, our disproportionate discipline numbers have stayed the same or gotten worse for years. Where is the bold action plan with benchmarks that will be demanded by you as school board members? Further, as the budget cycle approaches, will you as school board members ensure that the budget is valuing anti-racism, culture of all buildings, courageous conversations about race? How will you know these items are valued? Thank you.
Person, we do have two speakers. The first speaker is Deb Keither. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Deb Keither, Kuether. Chair Garcia and members of the board. I'm here, we just heard a lot about the shared vision, values, and mission. And we even heard words like joy, culture, transparency. And it's really odd being here and hearing those things when we're sitting right here and you haven't even cared to look at us or come greet us, or you have parents that are here, people that you could be activating. You can't even look at the constituents. We have been sitting here and not one person has made eye contact. We are attempting to engage you. Instead, you read your statements like robots. You mention things like Google Docs and stools. You have policies that have been in existence, or you have plans that have been in existence for 5 years. That's what Ms. Foley just mentioned. It's just paper. It's a wad of paper. You could potentially analyze policy. Director Leonard was onto something when he suggested, oh, maybe we should read that policy we're talking about tonight. That would be a good idea. So you know what language is in there. You could also write standard operating procedures so there is less opportunity for discrimination in policy. You could also juxtapose data against your policy. There's an idea. You could also, this is a stool, but it has more than 3 legs, okay? You can understand, you could look at video footage that you have in your possession of schools that have violence happening among students and teachers and adults. Instead, you ignore that. You sweep it under the covers. Yeah, you do that. You have done it. You've done it more than once. It's there. Instead, you want to do a Google Doc. Enough of that. You could also engage the peers. They can talk about video footage. They can talk about police reports. The police reports, have any of you looked at police reports for the schools that you oversee? There's oodles of them.
Madam Chair, the next speaker on this item is Amanda Hanson. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Amanda Hanson, Hanson.
Thank you.
I come before you today as a prior parent of the district to express my plea for change. Administrative Policy 1.013A states, students come first. As a parent, we trust the adults of the district to have our children's best interest at heart and conduct themselves with integrity and morals. These are our precious babies we send into your care. It's common knowledge that long-term bullying can result in serious damage to a young child's psyche. When we bring these things to you on behalf of our children, we're told you'll handle it, and we trust you. This wasn't the case for my son, who suffered greatly from physical and emotional abuse for an entire school year. He was told to end his precious life countless times. He was only 7. A huge portion of that year in silence from fear of retaliation because things weren't being handled as I was being told. Not a single act to intervene took place, Director Leonard. In emails, I asked several, if not all of you, before me, what if he had done it? Not a single one of you ever acknowledged it. Nothing will ever change or fix what my son went through, but it's an urgent plea that you hear me today and understand the risk involved when you ignore these concerns. These are children and their lives are at stake. It is your duty to put them first, so please do so. I beg you all today to uphold your policies and procedures, to conduct yourselves with integrity and hold students and staff accountable that harm others. I beg you to not ignore bullying ever again. Take it seriously right away. Handle these children with compassion and care. They are just little ones, with so much hope in their eyes, capable of amazing things. Protect them before we lose them. We loved that school. My other children are still hurt at the loss they endured, being ripped from their friends and favorite teachers. It shouldn't have had to be that way, but at least my son is alive. Children commit suicide at alarming rates from bullying every single day. Please start holding yourselves to a higher standard of care, Mr. Boswell. If students truly do come first, then do better. Thank you.
Madam Chair, that completes the public testimony.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And for speakers that did not get a chance to finish their words, please feel free to email those to us if there's anything else that you would want for us to ensure we read. And for Ms. Hansen, sorry to hear of what happened to your child. No, I'm saying, I'm sorry to hear that this.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I will make sure that board members get the testimony that was passed out tonight.
Yes, and I'm saying I'm sorry that that happened. Just acknowledging your words that you shared with us today.
That would have been appreciated a year ago.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Madam Secretary. Next item, please.
The next item is item number 2, an update with possible action on the development of school-based plans to reduce chronic disruption and suspensions. This is an informational item, and although it has been noticed for possible action, no action is required.
Would the administration please present the item?
Chair Garcia and members of the committee, in September of 2022, the board directed administration to develop a pilot plan addressing disproportionality by targeting chronic disruption suspensions in 3 schools that are amongst those with the highest suspension rates. The plan, in checking to see was it feasible and that it would be implemented in the 3 schools during the 2023-24 school year. To present this item, I have with me Mr. John Jackman, District Discipline Manager. Joining with us this evening with the presentation are 3 principals, Mr. Gross from Audubon Middle and High School, Mr. Aaron Shapiro from Bradley Tech Trade and High School, as well as Ms. Tank from Lancaster School. John, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Posley. Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman, District Discipline Manager. Again, we are centering ourselves in the 5 priorities for success. We are looking at how we can continue to improve district and school culture to increase academic achievement and accountability. So first, before we have the 3 principals present their plan, I want to kind of just touch base on what we mean by chronic disruption, because we are looking at these plans to address specifically chronic disruption. So in the Code of Conduct, we have all behaviors outlined in terms of a definition, and that is some of the work that we are doing with students and staff now to engage in focus groups on that. The current definition of Code of Conduct you can read as engaging in conduct that is disruptive to the learning environment, engaging in behavior that interferes with the teacher's ability to productively teach, and has interventions that have been implemented over time and have not remediated the disruptive behavior. So that is what we mean. We are looking at those interventions in place, and we are looking at situations that are chronic and they are not a threat to staff or student safety. As of February 28th, 2023, there were a total of 7,063 referrals for chronic disruption, which is around 21% of all referrals, and 2,214 suspensions, which is around 15.8% of all suspensions. So again, we can kind of lens what we mean by chronic disruption. Also want to briefly touch on some of the work that is in place in all school buildings in this multi-tiered system support. All schools have a behavioral T-chart which outlines all behaviors and really gets at identifying and defining at the school level what we mean by chronic disruption, because again, that can look differently in a kindergarten versus the 12th grade setting. So every school has that behavioral T-chart. Those behaviors and strategies are documented at Infant and Campus. When a disruption occurs and what that intervention is that is being implemented over time, we document that in Infant and Campus. Every school has a Tier 1 PBIS team and a building intervention team, or BIT, you may hear if you walk into school buildings. Every school has that. The minutes are uploaded into their school improvement plan on a monthly basis. Then we have those Tier 2 PBIS interventions, including check and check out, those SAG groups, BAPEs, FBA, BIPs, and things of that nature. Those are being specifically implemented for those students with those chronic behaviors. And then we have those administrator alternatives to suspensions. So once a referral for chronic disruption is in place, it goes to an administrator at the school building who has the ability to do some of those alternative suspensions like counsel, referral to BIT, repairing harm circle, restorative conversation, and those types of things. So now we'll turn it over to Mr. Aaron Shapiro.
Good evening, Chair Garcia, members of the committee. My name is Aaron Shapiro, and I serve as the principal of Bradley Technology and Trade School. Currently, at Bradley Tech, 24% of the office discipline referrals are written for chronic disruption. This represents the largest cause of classroom-based incident referrals, thus making it the biggest distraction to student learning. In an effort to reduce the amount of chronic disruption, our learning team met to discuss potential supports that could be put in place to reduce the quantity of chronic disruption referrals. The result of this work is the proposal that is being shared this evening. There are 4 key elements to this proposal that would support our instructional staff as well as our student body. The 4 elements are increased mentoring services, additional in-class personnel, additional time for staff development, student supports, and professional development focusing on classroom management and organization for all new hires. You know, many of our students arrive to school having faced challenges in their personal lives. Additionally, students have a wide range of academic ability. Mentoring groups have proven to provide the additional social, emotional, and academic supports students need in order to remain on task in the classroom. At Bradley Tech, we have mentoring services provided through the Milwaukee Violence-Free Zone. Along with their work with conflict resolution, the VFZ Youth Mentors manage a caseload of students who have exhibited patterns of disruptive behavior as well as struggles with their academics. The youth mentors are able to provide one-on-one mentorship to our at-risk student population. The impact of their work has been noticed in the improved academic outcomes of the students on their caseload. At Tech, the number of students who need this type of youth mentoring outnumber the amount of services that can currently be provided. As a result, the first component of this proposal would be to increase the staffing level of our youth mentors. A second strategy within the proposal to reduce chronic off-task behaviors would be the addition of personnel within our classrooms. Adding personnel specific to supporting disruptive classroom behavior in the form of behavior interventionists would have a direct impact on those classrooms. One challenge of our staff is to manage a class of 30 or more students. These interventionalists would be able to provide real-time coaching and support to individual classroom instructors. The interventionalists would also be able to work with our students in a student support space. Within the student support space, the staff utilized restorative practices protocol to address minor classroom disruption. You know, these additional personnel would provide a singular focus of reducing chronic disruption. The third element of our proposal is time. Time is a critical resource within our schools. Additional time within the day for teachers to receive professional development and collaborate amongst each other can be an effective way to decrease chronic disruption. Like many of our schools, we have teaching staff that are new to the profession. Identified time throughout the day can be utilized to offer additional professional development regarding classroom management, culturally relevant practices, and curriculum. In addition, have the opportunity for more peer collaboration. As a block schedule school, we are currently afforded one 45-minute period week as a duty period. Additional time dedicated to the professional development and staff collaboration would support us in achieving our goals, including the reduction in chronic disruption referrals. A final strategy to reduce chronic disruption is to ensure that our new educators receive professional development regarding classroom management and organization prior to the start of the year. The classroom organization management program, or COMP, is truly one of the best professional development offerings we have as a district. It supports our educators in the development of routines, procedures, and strategies to manage an efficient classroom. Setting aside time and funding to support our new educators in this professional development session prior to the start of the school year will increase the likelihood of a strong start. Chair Garcia, members of the committee, I want to thank you for providing me this opportunity this evening and have great appreciation for the work you do. It is now my privilege to introduce the proud principal of Lancaster Elementary School, Ms. Valencia Tank.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Good evening, Chair Garcia, members of the committee. Valencia Tank, principal of Lancaster Elementary School. Currently, 18% of Lancaster school office discipline referrals fall under the category of chronic disruption, which qualifies chronic disruption as Lancaster's second highest referral behavior, along with 50% of classroom PLP notes being for repeated classroom disruption. 85% of Lancaster's teaching staff currently have under 3 years of teaching experience. Currently, our school support teacher and Verizon teacher coaches have been a valued asset in providing additional coaching support needed for the high number of novice teachers that I have at my school to improve instruction. However, I've asked them to do more. The two academic coaches support me and our school leadership team with developing and implementing our comprehensive school improvement plan, achievement for all of our students. And although this work falls outside the academic realm, I just keep asking and needing them to do more. So the team has also supported me in taking steps to provide proactive supports and interventions to improve our culture, our climate, and creating alternatives to suspension, which I really appreciate them doing that for us. Some of the actions that we've been doing together as a team have been to increase coaching overall, intense professional development, even on Saturdays. We have Saturday academies, really taking a hard look at our data. We have Data Tuesdays, restorative school improvement strategies, and just really focusing on those 4 areas. With our continuous proactive plan, we were able to reduce our suspension rate year to date by 24.4%, which was, we celebrated that. Additionally, we have lowered office discipline referrals from 334 to 159 year to date. And we celebrated the hard work and positive movement. However, chronic disruption remains a challenge, and Lancaster has been consistently understaffed, and additional supports are needed in order for the school to operate efficiently and continue to make those same improvements. We looked at what we could do to make those continued improvements happen. One of the biggest things was the middle school. The classes are large, 30 plus. And so capping classroom enrollment to 20 to 1 in the middle school, we're looking to, in order that for that to happen, that would probably increase by 3 teachers. Smaller classrooms will improve academic performance, enhance teacher abilities to cultivate an environment of respect and rapport. We're really focusing on that missed learning and preparing students for high school. And you can only really do that if those classrooms are smaller. A trauma specialist, our city right now is having a trauma itself. And I think if we're being honest, our schools weren't prepared for the volume of trauma that are coming into our schools because of the increased volume of trauma that's coming into the city. So improve climate and culture with trauma-sensitive practices, and we need a trauma care specialist at the school. Continued ongoing professional development, again, for our novice staff and classroom management and organization. They're new, they have to learn. A full-time behavior interventionist teacher This teacher will provide positive behavioral support to students during the school day, because some behavior disruptions need to be addressed immediately, and they shouldn't stop the learning environment at that time. So we needed someone who would be that extra support person to address those behaviors at that point. And lastly, a full-time community mentor service. Maybe Running Rebels or City Year have been supports that have been at other schools. On-site support to resolve conflict, develop skills for personal growth. This will support teachers so that they can focus on academic and instruction and engagement, and to reduce chronic disruption overall. Thank you for your time. And now, Mr. Gross.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Garcia, members of the committee, Leon Gross, Principal, Audubon Technology Communications Center. As stated earlier, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you regarding some help in being able to provide a service that we know is uplifting not only to our families but to our district. As some of the information has been shared previously, we also are experiencing high percentages of student referrals, in particular under the area of chronic disruption and disorderly conduct. We have approximately 62% of our referrals in that area. More concerning, 27% represent chronic disruption, but 70% of it take place in classrooms. And so as the building leader, I'm charged with creating a climate, a culture, and a service that is going to prepare our students for post-secondary success, validation, and celebration. And so we need some assistance in regard to that. Specifically, some of the areas that we looked at under this assistance would be mandatory restorative training for staff. And so really what that speaks to is having all staff know the language and understand the processes and practices that can take place in classrooms that immediately invite students into the community. And so through that, there becomes celebration, there becomes validation, and again, authentication of who every student is and what they bring to our classrooms and our respective schools. Additionally, it helps to validate the staff, because there are times when the staff are looking for ways to build that community, and by providing that training, that mandatory training, it does give them a skill set that helps to cultivate that environment in their classrooms. Additionally, we talked about having a mandatory school-based orientation for our families, in particular students and their parents. So at Audubon, we still host the orientations at the start of the year, but a lot of it is really centered around some of the expectations and some of the reward systems and really a different type of welcome mat. But I think it's really important that the students understand that part of their job in growing up is that they're going to have conflict, that everything that they're learning at any given time, it may not necessarily align with what they feel their values are, and how do we then promote a situation and a practice where students use their intellect first and reasoning skills, repair harm, reintegration, and some of those other key components of restorative practice before they result to violence. And so this is something, again, that empowers them. It teaches them a survival skill, and it also teaches them an empowerment skill, because as advocates of their own learning moving forward, they will have to be able to use some of this language when they are looked at in a situation where maybe they don't feel validated. And so it may not necessarily result to an act of aggression, but it may be a requirement of a circle and being able to teach them how to advocate for that circle. Additionally, we talked about my third point being making sure that restorative justice and the concepts of peer jury and peer mediation are implemented in our schools. And so we need a resource for that. That's training that needs to take place not only with our students, but also with our staff, so that we can now purposefully and intentionally train students to serve as impartial mediators, but also be committed to listening to stories or listening to the perspectives of the victim as well as the offender, so that together they can compromise and understand that what has taken place has validation and truth, but now how do we move towards a compromise? And so again, this is something that we would use as part of a progressive plan that would support administration so that everything is not punitive. And then that peer jury could assign something that would be a consequence that's representative of whatever that infraction may have been. It could be community service driven. It could be something that's along the lines of tutoring, but it's something that you're giving back to the community so that we're able to use that as part of our progressive plan of support and intervention. We talked about, similar to my colleagues, having behavioral interventionists in our classrooms. And again, as spoken earlier, some of our phenomenal counselors, some of our phenomenal school psych, other support staff members, they're engaging in other practices that sometimes makes them unavailable or it becomes difficult to service a student that may have an immediate need. And so when we're talking about, again, restorative practices and validating who's in our community, at that moment, that child or that student may need someone to listen to me now. And so we have to have someone on staff that specializes in that now, so that when that immediacy arrives, that student is reassured that as a community we care. And so then we go back through the process again of restoration and reintegration, but you first have to listen to and validate that particular student's truth. And so that's what we need support with the behavior interventionists in our schools. Finally, we talked about hiring, in particular my middle school, because middle school is middle school. I love my babies. But class sizes are difficult. And when you're talking about learning sometimes or transitioning into a new community, traditional middle schools are very, very intimidating. And so now you bring that into a classroom where students really don't know how to navigate in this small city. To them, it may be a big city. And so then how do we reduce class sizes so that some of the aforementioned practices that I spoke to can be implemented in our classrooms? And it makes it very, very challenging when you do have class sizes of 30 plus to be able to see some of these actualize and take place. The final piece is just really us being reflective. And so as a district, when I spoke to my student discipline committee, they asked a specific question. Mr. Gross, what happened to the virtual program? Why are we not able to go to virtual school at Audubon? I know my teacher. Some of the instructors who I'm working with, they don't know me. Is there a way for us to have this program in our school? And so my last petition is really centered around just that. Are we able to reconsider, although we have a phenomenal program and in our virtual platform, we want to make it personal, because as some of the other pieces that were mentioned prior, when a student feels a part of the community, then they invest in their learning. They invest in their social-emotional, which we know at that point we spend more time celebrating the great deeds of our students in this district. And so that would be something that we were looking at trying to implement at Audubon, so that when students apply, they still have a choice. And that choice would be, I understand that I did well during the virtual season. I would like to continue that. Now you have that opportunity at Audubon, and it's not just limited to one aspect of our phenomenal district. And so that is my presentation to you, if you will, or conversation. I appreciate the opportunity, Chair Garcia, members of the committee, for allowing me to represent our truth at Audubon, and we know that together in collaboration, we will do some great things together.
That concludes our presentation. We'll be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
Excellent. Thank you to the principals that are here with us today, Principal Shapiro, Principal Tank, as well as Principal Gross. I think that being able to hear from you directly in regards to, items that have been inferred, that have been in offline conversations, just to have this be visible asks of things that you would want to prioritize, but because of, budgetary limitations, we can't necessarily make happen. And I think this is a real good conversation for us as a board, to really look at what are ways that we can think outside the box to really support the very, very important work that you continue to lead, for students in the city of Milwaukee. So thank you for the work that you do. I know that each day is different and it can be very hard at times to keep, your staff motivated and centered around why we do this work. So thank you for the efforts in doing that and for the reminder that, that's of utmost importance for us to continue to support the teachers in the classroom to ensure that there's a positive as possible climate that we can continue. There's research that shows just what positive school climate means for, student success. So thank you for sharing this with us. And is there any committee members that wish to say or share any words or questions? Director O'Halloran.
Thank you so much, Chair Garcia. And I want to reiterate my thanks to you all for bringing this to us, because very often it feels like at this committee, we, to use the words of Dr. Carolyn Stanford Taylor, we admire the problem. And I feel like this is very forward-looking and gives us ideas to consider and data to consider, like hearing about how many of the referrals are for things like chronic disruption. That's an area where we can probably work with. I did have specific questions about the school. Okay, I got permission from the chair. Okay, so one of my questions under the Lancaster proposal was defining subcategories for chronic disruptions, and I don't know who would be the person to answer. Does that need to be from the board, or does that come from administration? And if you have any guidance on what subcategories you think that we should be considering?
Administration.
Sometimes when teachers are writing their referrals, it doesn't give me enough information on what the kid is actually doing. And so I feel like it sometimes becomes a catch-all. And that's why that number is so high. And I'd like there is an opportunity for that narrative, but you all don't see the narrative, you just see chronic disruption. So I have an opportunity as a principal to see the narrative and, of course, discuss with the parent and the child what exactly happened, but you just see chronic disruption. So when we were looking at the data, that chronic disruption, I wanted to somehow be able to put some type of subcategory so we can define it just a little bit more. So I think we can, just by that data point, could probably bring that number down a little smaller into subcategories, so it would make a little more detailed, for lack of better words, for the committee.
Follow-up?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman, District Discipline Manager. I just wanted to add to what Ms. Tank was saying. We have that data in the POP classroom behavior notes, which is what the building intervention teams and the PBIS Tier 1 teams look at, and that is where the staff members are documenting what are those classroom managed behaviors. And like Ms. Tank said, that is a school-based data point. We don't share that across a lot of the district because it means less at our level. At the school level, they can kind of see even by grade level, by classroom, what are those specific behaviors that are continuing to occur in the classroom. They can drill a little bit more than just quote-unquote chronic disruption, but we document that as a PLP note in Infinite Campus.
Follow-up, Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I have another question, this time, excuse me, for Mr. Shapiro. So I think one of the requests was for more mentoring groups. I know you are a VFC school. Are you all currently staffed up? How many mentors do you have?
So Chair Garcia, members of the committee, So currently, our violence-free zone team is comprised of 5 full-time youth mentors. Each one of them take on a caseload of approximately 10 to 12 students at a time. As I mentioned in the report, it's unfortunate, but we have far more students who need those kind of services. And we have relied also on some outside mentoring from community-based organizations who aren't housed in the building. I shared some examples back in January. An example of that would be Own It. And what we found was that having that consistency of having youth mentors in the building on a daily basis provide a much more significant support for students. You know, we always appreciate outside help, but when it's inside the building each and every day, when that young person is experiencing a moment of trauma, of that off-task behavior being exhibited, having that mentor right there provides an immediate solution for the young person.
Thank you, because that's, I just wasn't sure if I know it's 5 per school currently, the model. I think it was originally designed with 8 in mind, and I think over the years it's been reduced to 5. I just wasn't sure if you had 5 positions and you had 4, or if you have 5 and you're like, yeah, I want that 8 back. So just something for us to consider. You did also mention, is it comp training prior to the start? And so would anybody be able, I have never gone through this training. Can anybody tell me more about it and if that would require action from the board?
Administration.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, John Jagman. So, yeah, comp is the 3-day, it's not 3 consecutive days, but it is the 3-day professional development. It's a national professional development that we have internal facilitators. It's housed in violence prevention, the violence prevention program internally in MPS. They run it throughout the school year. There's always cohorts going. I believe each of those sessions is a month apart. I may be incorrect on that. But really to continue to increase that, just make sure that we allow staff are aware of it and the opportunity, because they do have to leave their building for 3, again, non-consecutive days. But that, like Mr. Shapiro said, I agree. It is one of the most powerful professional developments. I took it years back as a teacher. It really gets you to rethink how you are centering instruction and in classroom management in your spaces. You literally look at your physical space and all of that. So we want to continue that district-wide.
Any more?
One more, and then I promise I'll be done. Okay, and then at Audubon, I have heard really great things about your readiness for restorative practices just in community and with staff members. So if we, I don't know how we would require that of students unless we added it perhaps to like freshman bridge or something like that. Is that kind of what you're thinking, like building in additional days as a requirement? Or do you have a vision for how we could bring this to fruition? And once again, what would you need from the board in order to help facilitate that?
Principal Gross.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, great question. And what I would envision it being, our students already sign a commitment or an understanding to like a weapons policy and something similar. And so what we're looking at doing is once this information has been presented, that we would require both the signature from the parent and the student. So we want both of those parties to understand, you know, what our commitment is to supporting restorative practices and how that looks not only in our schools but also in our homes. And so that would be something that I would look at receiving support just through a signature that says they've received the information, and then consistently throughout the course of the year, having opportunities to revisit that, but nothing that will be required as far as only targeting, you know, a certain grade level or anything like that, because all of us as principals, we do orientations, and I would just encourage that the language we use would be invitational for those families to come and not just, you know, a parent themselves or send a representative, because we do want to share that information with the families around the great work that restorative practices does.
Any follow-up?
No, thank you for that clarification. I know when you go through that at the beginning of the year and you sign all the forms, sometimes you just get in, you're just signing. So I definitely, anything that we can do to bring attention to it as they're signing, if we just add it to a form, I just want to make sure that families are really understanding and the students are understanding or have the tools to understand what they're signing, I guess. I just want, so everybody, I will also, and this will be my comment and then I'll stop. So my only concern with some of these is that they're very staff intensive and we already have like 190 plus vacancies. And so I want to thank you for bringing this to us. I don't want, if we can't get the people for you, I don't want it to come off as we are not hearing what you are telling us. I just don't know with the feasibility of creating additional positions if we already have vacancies within that building. Just, you know, to be real, from my perspective, I want to, if we put things through the budget, just that I would make it realistic. I just wanted to leave you with that. I want to thank you for this. This is exactly what I was hoping for when I put out that random request that caught everybody by surprise. Thank you so much.
Excellent, thank you. Any other committee members? Director Simpson.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. I think that you all really captured probably what many schools feel in the district, and you gave that great voice and you presented your concerns so eloquently. So just thank you. Just things that you all spoke to, you know, that we've talked about, class size, trauma, you know, coming into our schools from the city and what our students have to deal with, the importance of acknowledging student voice and their truths, the support that they need in that idea of community that you all kind of spoke to that. And like I said, you think you're just representing the collective voice of the district in your words tonight. So I just want to thank you for your testimony and kind of like really touching on some of those things that really all of our schools could benefit from. I did have one quick question though for Principal Grace. When you talked about the hybrid approach and virtual learning, if you could just speak a little bit more about how you would see that actually functioning in the school, what that would look like.
Principal Gross?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee. So that was an idea that came up from having a full grade level team. So in particular, I wanted to look at my sixth grade because they are entering into the middle school. And so having that additional person be able to support online, it would be a collective effort. And some ideas that came up when we talked to our student discipline committee was a lot of our young people are already logging into what's called Google Classroom, so lessons are uploaded. This person that is managing the online piece could be there to support in any tutorial services that may be taking place, any additional support that may be necessary from the standpoint of accommodations that have been implemented in assignments and lessons. But it would be a person that not necessarily looking to teach all subjects, but be an available resource to support the subjects that have already been created or the lessons that have already been created. And so again, we're looking at it just as another venue to be able to support students who prefer that online piece. And so, you know, even as far as attendance, as long as the school would show up to the class and submit work, then their attendance would be marked as present. This could also, you know, lend itself to individuals who may even be able to share some of their successes as it relates to how they were performing in person in comparison to how they were performing online, and then use that as a validation for their celebration. So that person would really serve more as a facilitator of the respective classes that are already created in the sixth grade. And so that's what we were looking at doing at Audubon.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, just for clarity, the district has MVP, which is a program that covers a virtual program for any student that wants to go there. And we also have one other virtual program. Mr. Gross is referring directly to his particular school. And also, if there's a student right now that that attends Audubon and they go to MVP, they're still on Mr. Gross's, as still one of Mr. Gross's students that can return back to Audubon. But we don't have individual schools with virtual programs right now.
No, and thank you for that clarification. And I can certainly understand a student's desire to be like, you're still my school, I just prefer to learn at home. So thank you for that clarification, I appreciate it.
Excellent. Director Leonard.
Okay, this is more of an observation and a request, so I ask you to bear with me. So I've been on this committee for nearly 2 years, and I've taken this really seriously. I've gone through dozens, if not probably 100 conversations already. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Gross and all the other people that are making such a difference in our district. You really are. I get a chance to observe your schools, and I know that you're making a difference with positive culture in our buildings. So I know that there are in some places where this is really happening, where it is working. And I wish we could duplicate it faster. I wish we had more staff to make that actually happen, because I do believe that our district is taking on a challenge that's actually going against what's happening in our society right now, but I won't go into that conversation. Also in that observation, though, it also sort of matches up or dovetails with the survey results. So one thing that's been brought up by almost everyone is smaller classroom sizes, and that is something that every stakeholder has said the same thing, that that's what they need to see, and that's just not teachers and administrators, but that's people in the community. It's almost everyone. And with that also is the fact that they are looking for smaller classroom sizes, but also safer buildings. So they are also speaking to those issues in buildings where situations need to be dealt with when staff members or other students or somebody else can come into harm. So we have to keep that in mind. It's really the same conversation, but it's a much smaller group of people, but it's something that we have to take on. And then the last one, which you all spoke of today so well, is the fact of building a positive building culture. I also want to say that I believe that includes a more inclusive, shared leadership approach. So that's to Bob Peterson's, President Peterson's resolution, that we really do have to go in that direction. As much as I see all this, and I'm stating this, a lot of our community members are also expressing a lot of frustration. And they also feel that we have not gained trust with them, with really some good reason, to be honest. So wisdom and correct or more effective strategy requires the more direct inclusion and input from our stakeholders, our parents, students, staff, administrators, and community members. I believe we have to take this rather seriously. And not as a task force or a board meeting, but rather in open listening sessions where discourse and clarifying questions and answers can take place. Formal board meetings don't really do this, and that's just the way it's designed, and I understand that. So we need to actually get our hands dirty and get into the trenches and actually sit down and have some really deep-seated conversations that may not always be easy to do. But my suggestion is that we start putting something together that will allow these listening sessions to start taking place, so that we can start bringing in the whole community into our conversations and help us start to bridge those resolves where we have not been able to do that. I am not sure if I am ready to do I'm not sure what the next step is in this, Madam Secretary. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to bring something next month to the board that would actually make that formal, or how that works.
Madam Secretary?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Director Leonard, are you speaking about the scheduling listening sessions?
Yes, scheduling listening sessions, yeah. I have not put anything real detailed together yet, but I want to get that started as soon as possible.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, we can definitely work with the administration to ensure that the topics that you want discussed at a listening session can be added to a community-based agenda, to make sure that the community listening sessions occur in the manner that you envision them to happen.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I just wanted to take the time to plug, when is the next community conversation happening?
March 15th.
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, yes. Next Wednesday is the next community conversation. Information and links are on the MPS website. I talked to the communications department today. They're starting their social media blasts in the morning, so it'll continue to be out there, but you can currently go to the MPS website and there is information there.
Excellent. So looks like we have forthcoming listening sessions that we will bring more information for. Any further discussion? Director Taylor?
I was trying to let us go because it's getting late. I guess I look forward to the community listening sessions. I'll probably be on the other side of it. But because you don't have it tonight, I'll just wait and see. I was going to ask more questions about how would that entail and align with what we're talking about tonight. The thing about it is, being a community member, a parent, educator, and then now on the board, what I often hear is like feel-good methods, or we have listening sessions, but I often think about what is the actions that are tied to it, and it's great for us to get that input from the community. But I also heard us talk about community conversations. We have these things at the school. We have something at central office, and now we'll have the listening sessions, and I'm just really looking forward to, I guess, effective and efficiency steps that take it, but actionable steps that come afterwards without just feel-good methods. So this is my 2 cents, but look forward to it. Thank you, Chair Garcia.
Of course. And if I could just add to that, I know that we just went through some stakeholder surveys throughout the whole city. So maybe aligning some of that as starting blocks as to maybe topics that result from that and prioritizing those. I think that would be a good strategy to, not lose momentum on an initiative that has already happened, aligning it with the good work that's already being done around, student discipline as well as building climate. And I think that that's a really good addition to, work that's already being done. So I'm looking forward to moving that work along. All right, Director O'Halloran.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if, I don't know if 1 month is enough. Like, I know April is kind of a funky month because we have all of our items on the full board, and then we're right in the budget season. So I don't know that we'll have the time to fully flesh out these plans or bring something through the budget process. Would administration be able to prioritize some of these recommendations? Like, I understand each proposal has many pieces, and I was wondering if administration would be able to prioritize that, or if board members would be able to, none of these are in my district, so I feel kind of weird speaking with other people's principals, but I don't know if what the, I don't know if that's stepping on anybody's toes to develop plans to bring through the budget process.
Administration.
Madam Chair, before administration speaks, we do have an individual on the platform that would like to speak on this item. So once you get the response, I just want to make sure we don't forget.
No, thank you for that. Administration?
Chair Garcia, members of the committee, we will be more than happy to take a look at all of the plans and prioritize and bring them back during the budget cycle, and even we can get those to you prior to that. So if you want to make some recommendations around that, but we will be more than happy to earmark just that, the dollar amount that's listed there, but to break them up and prioritize, we'd be more than happy to do so.
Thank you for that. Excellent. And yeah, so I'm not forgetting about members of the public that want to make comments. I just wanted to make sure that everyone had a chance to speak to, the school leaders that were here with us before. Yeah. So is there any members of the public that wish to make comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have an individual on our virtual platform, Angela Lucas Foley. Please state your name, spell your last name, and begin your testimony.
Angela Lucas Foley. Lucasfoley. Good evening again, Chair Garcia, directors, and members of administration. As a white parent and educator, I would like to remind the school board directors present that the goal of Director O'Halloran's proposal was to remake schools, not remake Black and brown students. The students are fine. The school system around them is broken. The intention, from my understanding of this motion, was to combat disproportionality, which stated in other words is discriminatory discipline against Black youth in our district. As school board directors, do you believe that the schools highlighted meet the muster of this proposal? What does it tell you that the 3 schools listed and presented upon tonight are the ones that have already been invited to PACE committee meetings to show off their successes? Moreover, consider that none of the presentations mentioned or centered race. As board directors, does this presentation meet the muster of Director O'Halloran's intent with her motion? If not, what is missing? Is school voice paramount? Is the race of students and staff being centered and examined? As community members, we would be interested in seeing alignment with the support of the climate of each selected building. How is the school being supported to be better and do better? What resources are already available? How are the resources already present aligned and supported, including the district positions already paid and funded discussed with item 1 tonight? How are roadblocks identified and addressed? Again, I say to you, our students, our Black and brown students are fine. Our school system is broken. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, that completes public testimony for tonight.
Excellent, thank you to Ms. Foley for your patience and for your words. Is there any further discussion? Okay. All right, Madam Secretary, next item, please.
Madam Chair, that was the last item on tonight's agenda.
Well, there being no further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.